If everybody, have your attention, if everybody could take their seats at the table, and if you have any continued discussions, if you take those in the hallway so we could get started. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tom O'Connell. I'm from Maryland and chair of the Striped Bass Management Board. We're a little behind schedule for the day and see if we can help the commission out and have an efficient meeting and get done in time to catch that up and have some lunch. So everybody should have an agenda. And our first order of business is to approve that agenda. Are there any comments in regards to modifications to the agenda? Yeah, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under other business, I'd like to offer a brief update of the cooperative winter tagging cruise from our colleague Wilson Laney.
Any objection to that? All right, we'll add that. Any other suggested changes to the agenda? All right, seeing none, the agenda stands approved. Our next item is approval of our proceedings from the October 2013 meeting. Any suggested changes to those proceedings? All right, seeing none, the October 2013 proceedings will stand approved. Next, we have a public comment period. This is an opportunity for the public to provide input to the board on items that are not on the agenda. As time allows, if there's decisions being made, we'll try to offer time for the public to comment, but again, that would be time-based. We do have one person signed up, Mr. Ken Hastings. If it's on an item that's not on the agenda, please come up. And just for the record, state your name and your representation.
Good morning. My name is Ken Hastings. I'm a recreational fisherman from Maryland. I'm here today representing Stripers Forever. As many of you may know, Stripers Forever advocates for game fish status to end the commercial exploitation of Atlantic striped bass. We believe, supported by some fairly strong economic studies, that the socioeconomic values of live striped bass far exceed their value as food. Substituting recreational priorities for commercial priorities would create an inherent conservation ethic, because it takes more fish to have a good recreational fishery than it does to have a good commercial fishery. We believe that the policies and priorities of this board are directly responsible for the decline of striped bass fishing, and that they continue to impede any progress toward restoration of the fishery. For example, allowing the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions to increase the exploitation of the 2011 year class in the face of possibly drastic cuts for everyone else in the future is irresponsible at best. Every fish we eat today will not join the spawning stock biomass in 2016. Not sure why no one saw this coming. Certainly signs were there, and I remember back to the Boston annual meeting, the DISC Commission chose to ignore the fact that data uncertainties can cut both ways. For some reason, the glass half full crew won that battle, and we probably have more fish than the data says, when in fact you apparently had a lot less fish than you thought. This encourages you to ignore even the admonishments of one of your own. And I was at the Georgia meeting, and I think the highlight of my visit to ASMFC in Georgia was the comments made by Commissioner Diodati when he made an eloquent plea for something to happen for striped bass. Plummeting fish abundance and lost recreational fishing economy and opportunities have become the norm and produce some of the worst striped bass fishing in years. You'll have other chances But each time you kick the can down the road a little further, you'll have fewer fish if you're really serious about restoring something and getting good recreational fishing again. It's time to stop kicking the can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings. Anybody else that didn't sign up that would like to provide input to the board at this time? All right, seeing none, we're going to continue with the agenda. So I'll hand it over to Mike Wayne in a second, but as you recall, at the last meeting in October, the board approved the stock assessment, set forth some follow-up actions to an addendum for reference points, tasked the TC to look at reference points for stock-specific areas like the Chesapeake Bay, and then to assess where the fishery is as we try to work our way back, if needed, to the target levels of fish and mortality. So Mike's going to provide an overview and then get a report from the TC. So Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as Mr. O'Connell just mentioned, we have two separate addendums here. The first one is for this meeting. It's draft addendum 4, and it deals with reference points. So sort of reiterating what Tom said, we had the benchmark stock assessment results that were presented at the annual meeting in 2013. Based on those results, the board initiated two addenda. The first is for reference points that include both the coast-wide stock and the stock-specific reference points for Chesapeake Bay and the Albemarle Sound Roanoke River, and then a follow-up addendum which would deal with the management options to reduce F to a level at or below the target. So these are currently two separate documents. So the timeline would be the board is reviewing the draft addendum for public comment at this meeting. We would take the document out for public hearings in February through April, bring it back for the board in May for final approval with implementation upon approval at that meeting. And so the purpose of this document is that there's currently a mismatch between fishing mortality and spawning stock biomass reference points. And the fishing mortality reference points are based on achieving maximum sustainable yield, while the spawning stock biomass reference points are based on the historical level of SSB in 1995 when the stock was declared recovered. So the benchmark assessment recommended that new F reference points be adopted, and those are set to stabilize SSB at the 1995 level. So what fishing mortality rate should we be fishing at to achieve 1995 SSB? And the projections are used to estimate what that fishing mortality rate is. The second part of this is that the benchmark assessment didn't recommend stock-specific reference points for those producer areas. And so the board tasked the TC to develop those stock-specific reference points for this document. So a little bit of background. Amendment 6 that was approved in 2003 established FMSY threshold of 0.34 and an F target of 0.30, which is 24% exploitation rate. And the target F for the Chesapeake Bay stock was reduced to 0.27 to account for the harvest of smaller fish in that area. Additionally, the Chesapeake Bay uses a harvest control model to set catch quotas that are just below that F target of 0.27. And there'll be some further background on that in the TC report. So the management options in this document are really just the reference point options. So the first is for the coastal migratory stock, and option 1 is status quo, so the F reference points would continue to be based on MSY. And option 2 is F reference points would be consistent with SSB reference points, and that would result in a new threshold of 0.219 and a new target of 0.180. So section 3.2, and this deals with the stock-specific reference point, and the TC report has some requests for more guidance on the intent of the stock-specific reference points for the board. So for this portion, I'll turn it over to Charlton Godwin, our TC chair.
Thank you, Mike. So the technical committee met 2 times via conference call, and we discussed the developing new reference points for the Chesapeake Bay and by default the Albemarle Sound Roanoke stock. The current model treats the striped bass population as a single coastwide stock. Historically, as Mike pointed out, the Chesapeake Bay has used a harvest control model with Target S to set their quotas. So the TC really is requesting some more guidance on the purpose of what the Chesapeake Bay biological points will serve in management framework. One option is to set reference points that assess the impact of the Chesapeake Bay fleet on the coastwide stock. Another option would be to have reference points or quotas, set a quota for the Chesapeake Bay fleet. So this would require 2 reference points. So to evaluate stock status, we need a reference point to measure F. The statistical catch-at-age model can provide this, but not for the Chesapeake stock individually. It measures the mortality of the Chesapeake fleet relative to the total coastwide population. The current Chesapeake Bay quota setting processes uses tagging estimates of F, but these cannot it's difficult to compare these to the model estimates F for the Chesapeake Bay fleet or the model-based reference points to evaluate the overfishing status. There's currently a disjunct between the tagging model estimates of F and the estimates of F generated from the statistical catch-at-age model. While total mortality are similar for both these methods, the tagging models consistently produce lower estimates of F. It looks like natural mortality from the tagging models is increased significantly, or it's a factor of immigration, but currently they're not quite comparable. So the technical committee really needs more guidance on what the specific purpose of these reference points will be.
Thanks, Charlton. And then just to wrap up the addendum, there's compliance where a management program that would address biological reference points would be effective immediately upon approval of the addendum document, because there's no specific management options. It's just a change in the reference points.
Thanks, Mike and Charlton. So under Agenda Item 4, there's also an item on catch and release fishing in the EEZ, but I would like to first address this addendum issue, and then we can talk about that issue. I think the TC and staff are looking for guidance on a couple of issues. The first one, obviously, is guidance for the TC to continue their work in looking at developing reference points for the Chesapeake Bay area. And they've laid out a couple of options, and it's my understanding that those options can also be worked in conjunction with each other. The other thing that the board should think about as we look forward to making a decision for approving this addendum to go out for public comment. Obviously, striped bass is one of our species that gathers a lot of public attention. As we learned through previous examples, sometimes it's helpful to not only put out an addendum with reference points, but also with management options so the public can look at both of them together. That may be an option for the board to consider, recognizing where we are with the TC still needing to do some work on reference points, that we can bring the reference points and the management options together in May and take that out for the public in the summertime. That would also address some of the staff resource needs to travel along the coast for doing these public hearings. But that's just an option, and through conversation with staff that I wanted to make aware to the board. So with that, let's open it up for some questions. Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job by the technical committee. A little bit of fog because you developed a possible couple ways that we could address this. The question would be, they're going to be in parallel, and would it be difficult for you to select one versus the other, or do you want to make, when you finally develop these options, that you want to put it back on the board to decide which way we go? In other words, you said if we went to option 2, you develop a separate set of reference points for the Chesapeake Bay, and that's the first part of the question. Second part, which would be more timely as well as accurate? We don't want to put together a partial document, rush it to get it out there, then have to go back and say, oops, we made a mistake. So if they could respond to that, Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, that the TC needs to do a little bit more work, and whether or not the board can provide enough direction to finalize this addendum and go out for public comment, or have them do some work, have staff to look at management options and come back in May.
A follow-up then to that, I'll be clear on it. I had a brief conversation with Mike, and I didn't bite him in the backside, but I think he thought I did. I was concerned when I saw the document that we got in the mail, all the work they've done, and apparently it became more convoluted and complex than my simple statement of said, hey guys, go do this. We got a second to it, and we had nods of head around the table. But my thought was that the sooner we can develop a technical committee or plan development team, I guess it would be a technical committee, can come up with a series of options that the public can take a look at to get their arms around. If we take the basic issue that we've got to reduce mortality on the larger animals, and use that as a premise, looking at the stock assessment, all people have looked at is that at 2015, 2016, that spawning stock biomass is not where they want it to be, and the concern of crash is in everyone's mind. So the two things I would suggest is that I would almost say if the technical committee believes that developing a separate set of mortality reference points for the Chesapeake Bay that is compatible, that makes sense, and Chesapeake Bay is treated similarly to the coast, that would be great. And secondly, to develop a set of options, bag size and season, and probably limit that to a very limited number, 3, 4, 5. Let's not get into 5, 10, 15, and talk about regions and that sort of thing. We talk about a coastal the way we have, and I think what will come into play is what we're doing now is a conservation equivalency. So if we can go along those lines as a start, I'm sure other board members might have some additional suggestions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I got Doug and then Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask a couple questions just so that I can make sure that I understand the issue that the technical committee is bringing before us. You know, under the current scenario we have right now, we have a target F of 0.27, which, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, was used in the harvest control model to set quota levels? No. There was no reference to F at all.
The harvest control model gives you a quota based on whatever F you put in, and in theory you could put in the F target of F.27, but in practice I think everybody who's worked on it has felt that F has been too high, or perhaps not too high, but that the focus in the harvest control rule has always been on maintaining sort of a constant level of F that's sort of, as it's measured by the tagging model, lower than that target. So in practice, although the F target is there as almost more of an upper limit, it's not, the current Fs that are going in are lower as measured relative to that target. So it's, in practice, the quota has been set on a much lower level than what we would currently consider the target.
That helps clarify things immensely, that you've been using the existing tagging F measurements to go into the harvest control model. So the only thing that has been in the past that F target that we have for Chesapeake Bay has really been something to measure the tagging mortality against, to make sure that we were not overfishing.
Yes, and I think the concern of the technical committee is that the tagging models and that model-based reference point don't line up, that you're sort of measuring them on two different scales with two different sets of assumptions. So the ability of that tagging rate to control and evaluate status is we have concerns about, versus using that to set a quota to control harvest that keeps it at constant levels relative to what's been done historically. I think we have more faith in that than evaluating status.
So the Chesapeake Bay states, are they going to maintain the current status quo for how you put, what kind of fishing mortality rate you put into the harvest control model? And if that's the case, then we really don't need option 2, we only need option 1.
Well, I mean, I think that would be up to the board in terms of, is the board satisfied with how this has been going forward? Would they prefer a sort of a historical proxy type approach like that to maintain what has been done in the past, or does, in which case we wouldn't need to, I think we would need to have that clarified in writing so that everybody so that this process is transparent and everybody understands where these numbers are coming from, versus if we do want to establish reference points, we would need to have them separate from whatever reference points we would use to monitor or evaluate status.
So then you're looking for 2 recommendations. One, do we want to have a target reference point for Chesapeake Bay that we could measure fishing mortality against? And then also a recommendation from this board as to how the harvest control model, which would be the specific details of how the harvest control model would be utilized.
Yes, essentially. I mean, with the understanding that the evaluating status is, again, on the coast-wide level, that is the Chesapeake Bay fleet overfishing the entire coast-wide stock, because we cannot give you anything specific to the Chesapeake Bay stock, but we could tell you, is it overfishing on the coast-wide level, versus, as we said, basically a set of reference points to help us or to help the Chesapeake Bay region establish a sustainable quota.
All right, thanks. Good questions, Doug. Rob, and then Michelle.
I think there's a real, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a real tug of war going on here about these reference points, from my understanding. And I think one of the situations the technical committee talked about was this fishing mortality rate that comes from the tagging. And of course, Virginia is a guest in the harvest control model regime since 1997, along with the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, but it was Maryland Department of Natural Resources that is the author of this model that stems back to when the fishery reopened in 1990. But the tug of war is, should you be using the target or not, as Katie Drew just mentioned. And Dr. Sharos here, if you do need any information, of course, he's more fluent on it, but there is a delta term in there from what I remember, so there is something that looks at the tagging F and the target. So that's one comment, and that needs to be looked at. But I think also another comment is we're talking about different producer areas here. It's not simply the Chesapeake, Hudson, Delaware, and Albemarle Roanoke. So there really is a big task at hand for the technical committee to go through, and I can't imagine, given the start to this process that's going on for a while, that this won't be a pretty good challenge. The other thing I want to mention, last thing I want to mention, is in Amendment 5 in 1995 and for Amendment 6 in 2004, it was fairly straightforward that once the coastal F had been determined and established that there was an ability to set the Chesapeake Bay target, and there is only a target as the reference point. And I hope everyone's looked back at that methodology. I got some questions as to how that methodology went forward back then, and I hope my information helped. But, certainly I don't think this is something that it should end up with the some of the real low estimates that I heard on the order of a target of .062 as a target F for the Chesapeake Bay. Just, it doesn't seem plausible. And whether you cheat the Chesapeake Bay fleet, whether you're looking at that or whether you're looking at the model, I think the technical committee has a challenge. And the other jurisdictions are waiting as well that have the producer areas. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Michelle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question for either Katie or Charlton, I guess. So how long has the estimate of F within the tagging model been sort of diverging from what's coming out of the catch-at-age model? How many years?
That started, it's probably been for the past maybe 10 years now, I think. The effect of MICO has been one of the pointed to as one of the culprits for the natural mortality increase. There's been a lot of study on that. Immigration could play a factor, as well as some of the tagged base components, such as the reporting rate that go into the tagging model could play an effect on that. So it's been going on for a while, and as they've noted, that the harvest control model has used the tag-based F estimates as opposed to the target F in their harvest control model to set their annual quota.
Okay, Rob.
Just wanted to follow up on that a little bit. So many years the management board listened to two types of results. One from the VPA, when the VPA was used, and now the statistical catch at age, but also the tagging studies that were done. And it was always a bit of a struggle because there never was any clear-cut information as to which of the two really should be the benchmark to go by. In most cases, it was always thought the VPA and now the SCA. So I'm out of touch a little bit here with this question, but the instantaneous catch rates, which is used by the Bay, is also something that went through, to some extent, peer review, and is also used as the preferred method for determining tag-based S. And is that still the case, I guess, is the question.
Yes, that is still the case. Our CR model did go through the last SART review, I believe, and so we still do use both of those. And if you look at estimates from the two models of total mortality, fishing and natural mortality, they are fairly similar. The disjunct really seems to be with the difficulty of estimating natural mortality. The tag-based model, natural mortality, that estimate comes out of that model, whereas within the statistical catch-at-age model, the natural mortality is an input in the model. The model does not determine that. We have in recent years, through this last assessment, they did actually update some of the natural mortality at age, if you remember from our last stock assessment presentation. But currently, both models are still being looked at.
Thanks, Scott. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I recall at one point Dr. Nelson from Massachusetts had a configuration of the SCA model that embedded the tag-based estimates of mortality directly into the estimations, as opposed to having them stand alone, which, as Rob pointed out, it's always been a source of some confusion to us as to how they're comparable or not. But I'm pretty sure he developed a version of that embedded the tag-based estimates right in there. And I'm wondering if that's in fact the case, and if further development of that, particularly as it relates to the Chesapeake Bay fleet, and that tagging study would allow you to start to tease out some of these questions of the stock size, what F should be fed into the harvest control model for quota calculation.
Yeah, so Dr. Nelson was working on that, and I believe it was not for this peer review, it was for the previous one, and it didn't work out, essentially. I mean, I think the model needed more development. The model really struggled with trying to combine that tagging input and the standard catch-at-age input, and so it's not used in the current configuration of the statistical catch-at-age model. I think the committee really does want to move towards a model that can incorporate these individual stock dynamics, whether that's through specifically incorporating the tagging information or whether it's through modeling these three stocks separately is something we're working towards, but it's not something that we're at right now that's ready for management use.
Thanks. So from my appearance of the board's discussions and no hands on the table right now, I think I'm going to have Mike just try to re-summarize the guidance that the staff and the TC is looking for from the board, and with that, hopefully we can agree upon the path forward. So, Mike?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give it a shot. So basically, I think where we've been talking towards, or the approach that the TC could further develop, is actually using both. So we would have a Chesapeake Bay fleet reference point that we would use to determine the status of overfishing or not, and then use the tag-based estimates of fishing mortality with the harvest control rule to be setting a quota. So it would be a combination of the two as we move forward, and the TC could develop that in the document if that's the approach the board wanted to proceed on. That is combined with the coastal reference points, which we have that come right out of the benchmark assessment.
Pat?
Mr. Chairman, could we just take a vote on that? It sounds like a very clear-cut approach without encumbering it with a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, do we need it as a separate motion, or can we just agree to the direction that the technical committee suggests we go?
Guess I'll leave up the pleasure of the board. I mean, if there's no opposition to go forward with that approach, I don't necessarily think we need a motion, but if people feel like a motion is needed, we can entertain that.
I don't think a motion is needed, Mr. Chairman, unless someone has objection to it.
So, Mike, let me ask you a question. So basically, what you just laid out, is that what would be accomplished with what's currently in the draft addendum?
Not entirely. I mean, the TC report lays out that those two separate options, which we could use in combination, and combine that with what was already in the addendum, which was the coastal reference points. Now, remember, the one thing that we haven't got to is the Albemarle Sound Roanoke River stock reference points, and that was because their North Carolina assessment is still in the peer review process, and so because there are still edits being made to that assessment, the TC didn't feel comfortable with presenting those reference points at this time, but that could also be part of the task here, is to incorporate those as well moving forward.
All right, thanks. So what does the board think in regards to the pathway that Mike laid out?
I suggest we do it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let me get Doug for a second.
Yeah, so essentially what, and I may be wrong, but I think you're recommending that we go forward with both option 1 and 2. Correct? So I would certainly support that. And if we need a motion, I'd be willing to make that motion.
All right. Is there any opposition from the board to proceed with that guidance to the TC and the PDT? All right. You good with that, Mike? Okay. So what is the board's pleasure in regards to moving this out for public comment between now and the May meeting, or waiting until we get we come back in May, we look and see how the fisheries are performing against these reference points and options that would adjust the fishery accordingly? Michelle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I would prefer to come back in May and review what the technical committee has come up with for both of these options, as well as, hopefully by then, the Albemarle Roanoke reference points. And, alluding to what you laid out earlier, I think it would be wise to include draft management measures to go along with those reference points. I mean, it doesn't... I know we talked about this at the last board meeting, but it would make more sense to me to, save on staff time and resources and, combine the change in the reference points and link that to any management changes that are needed in order to get ourselves back down to the target reference points so that the public sort of has the complete picture to look at. But I would, love to hear what other folks around the table think.
Thanks, Michelle. I got Paul and then Richie.
I just also think that the draft addendum is lacking detail. I think that there needs to be more information for the public about potential consequences of one option, one outcome over the other. And there's really nothing in here. So if someone doesn't get a chance to attend a public hearing, where I'm sure we would do a thorough presentation if they just looked at this online, I don't know what the public would make of this addendum. I think it would be very confusing. So I think we need more clarification and detail in the addendum.
Good suggestion, Paul. Got Richie and then Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support delaying until we have management options to be in the addendum. I think going to the public twice is a waste of resources, and actually I think you won't get a lot of public turnout for what we just put forward. My only concern would be that the timing of this then would still allow us to implement new regulations for the 2015 fishing season, and that this would not delay that. So.
Yeah, and it's been very clear to me as chairperson that the public and the board wants to address this issue for 2015. This pathway that we're talking about will put a lot of work on staff and the board in May to have a document that can move out to the summer meetings, but coming back in August to make some final decision would still put us in a position to implement in 15. Just follow up, Richie?
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just suggest then that there be enough time allowed for the Stripe S Board meeting at the May meeting, if there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting, that we have enough time to do it.
Thanks, Richie. Mark?
Yeah, thanks. I support, waiting until the spring meeting. I really like to see what the technical committee comes back with. I'm really struggling, to wrap, as I have for decades, to wrap my brain around multiple spawning populations, geographically distinct fisheries that affect cohorts from a particular spawning population at different age groups. And, we've gotten by with the tools that we've gotten by with, but I really like to. I still think this is an ad hoc approach, what we're talking about doing here, but so I'd like to see what comes out of that. But I really hope that there's a strong push down the road to really produce an integrated stock. This is the most data-rich species we probably have, and an integrated stock assessment model that considers separate spawning populations, but linked through migrations and exposure to fishing mortality and so on. But that's really where we need to get to start addressing some of these thorny technical problems. We've muddled through pretty well with what we've had, but we need to do better down the road. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. We've heard from several. Got Russ?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if Mark's having trouble getting his brain around this, you can imagine how the rest of us feel. So I'm full support of moving this to the May meeting and joining it up with the other addendum and moving it forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Russ. Anybody has concerns with going forward? I do see your hand back there. I think given schedules, we're going to keep plugging forward. We're not going to have an opportunity to provide public comment. There's going to be a lot of that opportunity going forward, so apologize for that. All right, so seeing no opposition, is the board comfortable with providing staff that guidance to continue working on this, come back in May with reference points as well as options, and we'll have that conversation with the intent to agree upon something to go out for public comment this summer? All right, so that sounds good. All right, the next item on the agenda is an item that came up in between our meetings on catch and release fishing in the EEZ. It was an issue that I know Louis Daniel brought forward, and I think Michelle or Paul would like to provide a little background. You guys draw straws before the meeting? I guess Michelle's got it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think it was Lewis's intent, really, that this discussion happened during the policy board meeting. He couldn't be here this morning. But just as background for the board's benefit, we've received some calls from the North Carolina charter fleet out of Oregon Inlet voicing some concerns about enforcement of catch and release fishing in the EEZ for striped bass, and just that perhaps there are some inconsistencies in that enforcement up and down the coast, and that it may be that there are some folks that are using the opportunity to catch and release striped bass in the EEZ as a business opportunity and providing economic benefit. So I think Lewis wanted to have a discussion about perhaps addressing that inconsistent enforcement and determining if there's a good vehicle for addressing that, whether it's an addendum or something else. And clearly, we would need to have a conversation with our partners at the National Marine Fisheries Service about that. So I don't know if Paul would like to sort of fill in after that.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think Michelle summarized that quite well. I think there's still some unknowns about how severe the penalties are and how enforcement in the EEZ is actually conducted. I can only guess that it's a difficult type of enforcement action to carry out, so I'd like to hear more from enforcement about that, and from our technical committee as well, about what the impacts they perceive would be if we modified or requested that the federal rule be slightly modified to allow catch and release fishing, so it's no longer an infraction to do that.
Yeah, so, another perspective that was brought forward in the conversation is, given what we're talking about with the stock and whether or not this kind of a catch and release approval would result in any increased effort, there are some mortality associated with discard. So, I see Tom Foti, but I'm thinking that this is an issue that deserves more conversation and more input from the technical committee, the law enforcement committee, and probably maybe even some guidance from our advisory panel to get a sense of what type of behavior change would result, and would, the suggestion that effort would increase. We're hearing that from our fishermen in Maryland, so, we'll continue discussion, but I'm thinking that maybe we take this to our experts and have them come back and get their input in May. Tom?
I was reviewing a bunch of discs that I had of old films going back to '90 of sitting on the beach in Long Beach Island with Congressman Saxon talking about keeping the EEZ closed. Remember '96, 2002. It's really been an ongoing situation. We need to have uniform enforcement. I couldn't believe some of the groups that are supporting opening the EEZ, the same groups are asking us to go to one fish. So I have a difficult time with that. But I think we need more thought on this. It's not something to decide today. We don't have the time to do that. And I suggest we don't do anything until we have a long discussion on this, because it is a very controversial issue, and it always has been. And, it was one of the largest public hearings I think NIMS ever had. It was 3 of them in a row in New Jersey with 900, where we got thrown out of a building because we had over 700 and they couldn't fit them in the building. The fire marshal threw us out, so I don't want to go through that again.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A final comment would be, do you think you could convene this committee sometime between now and for our May meeting and come back with a preliminary report, have some idea? I'm sure enforcement has some great ideas, and the advisory panel has always been real good about doing something. Maybe it would require a telephone conversation or two, conference call.
All right, and there is a lot of workload on staff between now and May, but Mike said that we'll give it the best shot. I think we need to be very clear. My thought is the law enforcement committee, I think what I'm hearing is that we need to get a summary of how it's currently being enforced, what the penalties are, and also their feedback as to if catch and release fishing was allowed, what that would result for them. For the TEC to try to the best of their ability, assess what the magnitude of mortality a catch and release fishery could amount to, and from the advisory panel, just getting a sense of level of effort increases in the federal waters. Pat?
Maybe push it off to the August meeting. You're right, they're loaded with effort, so maybe during that period of time we can put it together for the August report.
All right, Richie?
Included in that report, I believe the Commission wrote a letter to the service, and I think the Coast Guard, asking for increased enforcement and increased penalties, I believe, and so providing the board with those letters might be helpful too.
Thanks, Richie. Tony, do you have a comment?
The intention of bringing this up under the addendum topic is that if we do want to make a recommendation to allow catch and release fishing in the EEZ, it's something that we would need to actually take out in an addendum process. And so if we have an addendum that is going to go out in May, then we would need to make that decision to include it or not include it in May. So pushing off till August would not get you there.
It's back to the board, priority setting. Do we feel like this is important enough to task staff to look into and come back at the May meeting as a potential management option discussion? Got Doug?
Yeah, I agree totally that this needs, whatever comes out of this needs to be very transparent and needs to go out to the public. It sounds like we need more information on this before we can even consider putting this in the addendum, and if that means that we're going to put it off considering this to another management action, I'm comfortable with that at this point. Clearly, we need that information beforehand, and if we can get it by May and decide whether to put it in, that would be ideal. But if we don't have the input of law enforcement and technical committee, and I think the AP should have the benefit of that information before they meet, I think we should try to get it by May, but if not, it may have to be put off to another management action.
I think that sounds like a good approach. Tom?
Yeah, I agree with that approach, especially since we are probably going to go out, if I've been feeling the pulse of the board, with a couple of striped bass addendums in the next year or two, so we can include it in one of those.
All right, thanks. So I'll just try to summarize this. We'll do the best that we can to try to begin getting some input from our various advisory bodies. If we have it for the May meeting, great, but it may, just to manage people's expectations, that it may have to take more time after that. Rob, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm just reporting what I hear, and not just in Virginia, but also the idea that if there's a measure to reduce the possession limit to one fish, there are those who are also interested in that one fish being allowed to be from any jurisdiction, federal or state waters. I mean, that's also something that is in several states that I've heard from. And of course, this is going to be an issue for the technical committee or someone to figure out, does staff or the technical committee think that that there's indirect monitoring of the fish that are in federal waters, that are in the EEZ? Is there enough monitoring that you have information on those fish? That'll be an important part of this report, because really there's no or very little direct information from the EEZ. So I think that's something that's going to be an underlying situation here as well.
Richie?
I just see what was put up on the board, and it sounds like that there's catch and release fishing in the EEZ, which is not allowed. So, I mean, any fishing for striped bass in the EEZ is illegal at the present time. So.
Yeah, so the information we got from NIMS was and Steve can correct me, their current rule does not allow any targeting or indirect targeting of striped bass. So there are fishermen that are in the EZ that are targeting bluefin tuna, for example, will occasionally catch a striped bass, and it's left to the officers to use their discretion. Fishermen are a little concerned about that officer discretion in regards to what the penalties are. It was clarified, despite some rumors, that the penalty is not a felony unless it relates to like fraud or Lacey Act violations, but it was not a felony. But that's the concerns that were raised from North Carolina. The fishermen are really concerned based upon some rumors and incidentally catching striped bass and what happened to them. Richie?
We've had some actions up our way in which people were targeting striped bass and said that they were fishing for bluefish, and the ones that had 20-pound test mono leaders got tickets, and the ones that had wire on didn't. So.
Tom?
I was listening to Rob's statement, and I realized that would be a whole nother can of worms, because what you're doing is reallocating fish, back bay fish, basically beach fish, where a lot of surf fishermen, that's their only real game fish. They can't go for bluefin tuna from the beach with any surety or sharks or things like that. So if you're going to go tell them that you're going to go for one fish so you can open up the EZ for recreational one fish fishing, it's going to be an interesting discussion when you look at all those surf fishermen, Back Bay or Chesapeake Bay and Delaware River fishermen and Long Island Sound. So it's more complicated than just going one step at a time.
All right, Kelly wants to provide a brief comment to the board, and then unless we hear otherwise, we'll proceed with the summary that I provided a few minutes ago. Kelly?
One thing the advisory panel has been very clear on for a number of years is the great concern with the Wave 1 catches, which are totally unregulated and unmonitored in the EEZ, especially in January and February, North Carolina, Virginia, and to a lesser extent Maryland. So the advisory panel, at least most of it, has been consistently calling for the much stricter enforcement, much stricter penalties. And at this point, now that it looks like there is some fairly strong enforcement, and there have been some strong penalties, Though the advisory panel hasn't met for a few years, I believe that's pretty much exactly what the advisory panel, and by extension the people they represent in their various respective states, I believe that's what they wanted. So I want to give kudos to law enforcement because the magnitude of those catches in the EEZ are tremendous, especially like off Virginia. I'll see 1,000 boats out in the EEZ, average of 3 or 4 people on each boat, 20 to 40 pounders common, everybody limiting out, a lot of them being kept. Some of them probably dying from catch and release, most would survive. Long story short, the various sources of mortality that's engendered by that activity, which has gone on for 10 years, has been completely unmonitored, and the advisory panel has sort of felt that it's fallen completely under the radar in terms of the stock assessment and all the other benchmarks that are derived from that. So I just want to mention, it's kind of odd, finally the advisory panel got what they wanted, and now maybe that's not what people wanted, but just wanted to bring that up.
All right, thanks. So Mike's agreed to cancel his vacations between now and May, and we'll task this to the appropriate bodies. I think Doug had a good suggestion to try to get TC and LAG input before going to the advisory panel, and we'll do the best we can and bring it back to the May meeting and see where we're at. All right, next item on the agenda is 2013 FMP review and state compliance. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is a 2013 FMP review of the 2012 fisheries. So it got postponed from our October board meeting last year. So this is just a quick review. Status of the stock has since been updated as we had a benchmark assessment, but we are not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring based on the reference points that we're currently using. SSB has declined, but we are not overfished, and we are not experiencing overfishing, although these reference points, as I note, we're looking to change in the coming addendum. So in 2012, total harvest was roughly 25.8 million pounds. The commercial fishery landed 6.51 million pounds, which was slightly lower than the landings in 2011. The Chesapeake Bay commercial landings were 3.92 million pounds, and the coastal commercial landings were 2.6 million pounds. There were 2 states that had overages in 2012, and so their quotas were adjusted accordingly in 2013. The Chesapeake Bay harvested underneath their quotas that they set using the harvest control model, as we talked about earlier. And the recreational fishery landed 19.27 million pounds. That was a 30% decrease in landings from 2011, and it's decreased for the 6th year in a row releases. And then recreational catch estimate is lowest since 1994. That's a 74% decline from the peak in 2006. And this figure just shows the status of the fishery. You can see catch decreasing from that peak in 2006. And the Chesapeake Bay spring trophy fishery harvested at a lower level in 2012 than they did in 2011. The juvenile abundance indices, actually, we went over this report at the last meeting. So that trigger has not been met, but there are a few states that have had recruitment failures in 1 or 2 years. So we'll be continuing to monitor that moving forward. And then the Albemarle Roanoke harvested underneath their quota in 2012 as well. And all states are in compliance in 2012, and there was just a handful of regulatory changes that occurred. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike, for the nice summary report. Any questions for Mike? Rob?
I think this is related, but the recreational data will be fairly complete, preliminary in February, and then not too long after that complete. And the commercial data may lag behind a little bit, but since the projections that were done through 2012 and then projected forward that showed the problem with the SSB. Is there going to be any run at all to look at adding 2013 data? How's that going to work out?
I think Kate's going to answer the question.
So are you talking about just updating the projection part of the model, or do you want a complete update of the assessment model?
Thank you. I think it's the projections that really gave everyone a lot of concern, and it'd be nice to see that they could be updated.
Yeah, I believe that the projections could be updated fairly easily with the 2013 data, and we would most likely have to do that when we were examining some of our the management options as well.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, to do that, remember, we'll need landings from all of the states. So that stuff is usually due in compliance reports, which aren't due until June, I believe. So if we're going to do that with 2013 landings, we're going to need the states to submit those landings in time for that to occur.
Rob?
Certain states can do that fairly easily. Other states, I realize, have a delay, but I would encourage that at least an attempt be made to do that.
So does the board want states to do their best at providing 2013 harvest data to staff? All right. So I think I can interpret that as no objection. Bill?
If I might ask, Mike, Mr. Chairman, on page 7 of the compliance report, I guess, or no, review, page 7, am I reading this right that the commercial landings for 2012 totaled 839,329, and this and dead discards was 818,000, like almost equal to the total catch?
Yep, that's what it says.
Is that correct?
That's what it says.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, discards have dropped substantially in recent years, but not too recent past, discards were close to the same level of harvest as estimated.
Well, I mean, they discard, if they caught 839,000 and they discarded 818,000, what'd they bring in?
No, they harvest.
That's the discard is the mortality of their released fish.
That includes the harvest number?
8.6 million.
I think that graph, I don't know if they can bring it back up, but it's intended to show two things. One is the direct harvest, and then also the mortality associated as discards to the fish that are caught and released. So the overall mortality is cumulative over the fish that were removed from the waters and those that were released, and a fraction of them died.
Right, to clarify that the two numbers are additive. So we know what they landed, and that's what's reported as landings, and then we estimate what was discarded, and that is in addition to what was landed and brought to dock and reported.
All right, so if states have their landings data for 2013, provide those to Mike as soon as you get them, and we'll see if they can be updated for the projections by the May meeting. All right. Do we need a motion to approve the F&P review?
Yeah, no compliance issues.
So there's no compliance issues with the 2013 compliance review of the 2012 fisheries. There's two states that went over quota. They're deducted for their 2013 fisheries. So do I have a motion to accept the F&P review? Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to do that. I'll move the board approve the FMP report for 2013 as presented today.
A second, got Michelle. Joe, do you need me to read that? Okay, we're good. Is there any opposition to that motion? right, seeing none, the motion carries. We have one other item under other business. Mike Millard was going to give an update on the cooperative winter tagging cruise. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn that over to Wilson Laney.
Thank you. Wilson, you just state your name for the record.
Wilson Laney, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike has on the screen up there a plot of the recaptures from the 2013 tagging cruise releases. We've got two different maps to show you. This one is a bubble plot with the dots proportional to the numbers of fish caught at the individual locations. And there were, so far through the end of January, I think 145 recaptures from 2006 fish that were tagged and released. Of those, 900 and some odd came from the trawl-based tagging, and the remainder, 1,100 or so, came from the hook and line releases. And then if you can throw that other one up there, if you look at in the lower left-hand corner, the red rectangle there encloses the approximate area where we caught all the fish during the 2013 operations. So both the trawling and the hook and line operations were pretty much not confined to that red square there, but that's where we found all of the striped bass. We sampled with the trawler well on down to the south below Oregon Inlet, and we caught no striped bass last year in North Carolina waters. Then this year, to update you on our situation, recall that we were seeking funding to match an existing North Carolina coastal recreational fishing license grant, which we had, which was going to pay for half of the operations this year and next year. We submitted a proposal to the Saltonstall Kennedy program, and we initially thought we would hear whether or not we got that funding by January 1, which would have allowed us to use the RV Savannah out of Georgia to conduct the trawling operations. Unfortunately, I think due to the government closure and other issues, the National Marine Fisheries Service hasn't yet made decisions on those. So even if we are fortunate to be approved for funding, we wouldn't be able to use that funding, I guess, until next year. If we're not approved, of course, we'll have to resubmit an application for future year funding. So we didn't get funding to do the trawling in 2014. We do have the funding, and we are currently conducting the hook and line tagging, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Godwin to let you know how things have gone thus far with that operation.
Thanks, Wilson.
Thank you, Wilson. It'll be pretty short. We have had, we've taken two trips. We took one trip yesterday. We did not find any schools of striped bass. And we took a trip last Monday. All of our trips for last week were canceled due to weather. It's been a little unusually difficult this year to really so we're going out of Rudy Inlet, Virginia with charter boat captains for hook and line. The sea bass fishery hadn't been going on, and there hadn't been a lot of tuna fishing going on out there, so there haven't been a whole lot of boats going out to kind of know where they're seeing schools of rock as we're going. So we're really having to just search kind of in the blue at first. We're hoping to get 2 or 3 days in a row to where we can go out and locate some schools and tag some fish. So we've taken 2 trips. We've got 8 more planned. I'm leaving this afternoon to go back. We're going out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Weather looks good for this week and hopefully next week. So we tagged some pretty good numbers last year, over 2,000, roughly 2,100 fish from our hook and line portion, and so we had some pretty successful days last year. So we hope to continue that.
Thanks. Appreciate that update. Anybody have any questions for Wilson or Charlton? All right. Well, thanks a lot. Mike's got one remaining item to wrap up our meeting.
Sure, not quite an important one here. This is Tom's last meeting as board chair for striped bass, so I just wanted to thank him for the last 2 years of his service, and also Alexei Sharoff, who has been our TC chair as well. So thank you, Tom.
Appreciate that. And with that, we'll adjourn. We only took one of our 2 hours, so we're going to bank that for the May meeting, Bob, right? All right, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, if Paul could update us on the Commonwealth's plan for the tagging of commercial striped bass, how he plans to implement that, and what progress has he made?
Yeah, I think the current management plan gives us to have that plan into place 90 days prior to the start of our season, which isn't until later in the summer. So we're still working on that. We go to public hearing next week on some of the issues, but right now we are proposing a point-of-sale tagging program, which is one of the ways to be consistent with the current plan. So we'll inform you after our public process. We're still in rulemaking, essentially, so I can't really say too much about it until a couple of more weeks. I think February 21st we'll close our comment period, and if we can provide a memo or share our memos with our advisory commission back home. So.
All right, thanks, Paul. Any objection to adjourn? All right. Thanks for everybody. Great meeting.